Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. And before I kick off, I just also want to say a huge congratulations to E3G. As an alum, I have to say I learned a tremendous amount from my time there that I've taken with me throughout my professional and personal career. And you've made a massive contribution to getting us where we are now. And a particular shout out to Nick Mabey, one of the brilliant brains that we have in our movement. Thank you, Nick, for all your leadership over all these years. By 2025, all parties to the Paris Agreement have to communicate their new climate plans for 2035. In a time of war of the European continent, humanitarian crises in the Middle East, debt distress in many developing countries, and a cost of living crisis in a vast majority of industrialized countries, this may not sound like a significant milestone for national and international politics. But in these turbulent times, there is an existential crisis that unites us all, which we know, which is the fight to keep global warming at a 1.5 degree rise, below that. And in doing so, limit mounting droughts, floods, hurricanes, and forest fires to a manageable level. This crisis is simultaneously deeply global and deeply local. Be it punishing heat waves hitting Mecca, Delhi, or London, putting particularly the most vulnerable segments of population at risk, or the devastating floods in Bavaria, Nairobi, or Rio Grande do Sul. The impacts, well, they're hitting at an ever shorter intervals across the globe, with all of the economic damage and the human suffering that entails. Internationally, the climate crisis is a driver of instability. Think of the 20.6 million people requiring urgent humanitarian assistance following floods in Pakistan in 2022, and the nearly 8 million people still displaced, or the existential issues facing vulnerable Pacific island nations. In the worst cases, it is already an accelerator of conflict, as in the intensifying resource conflicts in the Sahel. So it is undeniable that the climate crisis is already reshaping international and national politics, as Nick mentioned. And these are all the impacts that are happening below a 1.5 degree C rise. So in the words of my foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, the climate crisis is the greatest security threat of our time. And current climate plans for 2030, well, they see us on track to a well over 2 degrees world. And this may not sound like a lot, but the seemingly small interval between 1.5 degrees C and 2 degrees C contains massive differences in climate impacts, and the risk of tripping, cascading tipping points like the cascade of the Amazon rainforest or the melting of the permafrost that could see our trajectory shoot up to a well above 3 degree world. And as the UN Secretary General so clearly put it, we are on a highway to hell. And these are the risks these are not the risks we can be affording to take. And this is my first key message. In this time of turbulence, the road to Belem is important because the decision that we take along it, well, it will determine the fundamental stability and security of our world. Best available science has set us clear benchmarks. Numbers matter. Deep emission reductions globally, 43% by 2030, 60% by 2035. And achieving it doesn't just mean setting big headline emission reduction targets for 2035. It means getting serious about the economic transformation that these nationally determined contributions, NDCs, are meant to communicate. And taking this seriously, well, it means developing national economic development and investment plans that bring us back on track to 1.5. So getting on track along the road to Belem also requires decision makers not being naive about managing the politics of transition and of the mounting climate impacts. And this is my second message. Success on the road to Belem requires us to seize the opportunities that climate planning offers for economic development and social justice. Climate-related policies cannot only be climate-only policies. Instead, they need to be designed to maximize economic gain and social benefit. Only then can we see the pace and scale of transition needed and, to go full realpolitik, limit the opportunity for political point scoring that threatens to derail or delay the transition. This is a challenge, not just for our policymakers, but for our national politics. We've never done something like this at the pace and scale required. And so there's also good news to help us move through this. There is a huge amount of opportunity to be had, and change is already occurring. Renewables, well, they've never been cheaper, and they're bringing new quality jobs. The German renewable sector now employs over 400,000 people, 20 times as many as coal. And every pound, euro, or dollar invested in climate action now saves 6 times as much in climate impacts down the line. So we are still barely in this golden window where an investment in climate action is an investment in our prosperity as well as in our stability. And we need to be brave and decisive enough in politics and in policy making to seize it. This is why Chancellor Scholz and President Macron have come out strongly in support of putting the Green Deal at the heart of Europe's new competitiveness agenda and industrial strategy. And I know that there are questions right now being raised about the future of the Green Deal with a more conservative European Parliament. But the reality is that there is strong binding legislative and regulatory frameworks, foundation that's been set by the European climate laws and the Fit for 55 package. And also, bringing in kind of security and politics, European businesses, well, they want continuity. They need continuity in this. In Germany, the last 2 years, well, have been a masterclass on what responding to the new national and international climate politics looks like. The Russian war of aggression in Ukraine made us painfully aware of the vulnerability that comes with our dependence on fossil fuels, turbocharging an acceleration of the energy transition. We passed the largest legislative package on energy in our history, setting an 80% renewable target for 2030. And I'm very pleased to report that in 2023, for the first time, more than half of our electricity was generated from renewables. Currently, it's at about 58%. We are no longer importing natural gas from Russia. We also have managed to close 15 coal power units just this year. But I want to be frank with you. The last 2 years, they were not a walk in the park. So enabling this tectonic shift, well, it required and requires acceleration of bureaucratic approval processes, a balancing of nature and renewables, and importantly, an inclusion of local communities. And this is not even touching on issues around housing and efficiency measures that have also been implemented during this time. It requires leadership and diligence. And despite the challenges, we are working to be the shaper, not the taker, of the economy of the future. There's no going back to a world before extreme weather events, before IRAs, or e-mobility. There is no option to just push pause. Instead, we have the skills and the capacities to shape a better, more modern and resilient future, and we are deploying them. This also means changing the way we approach our foreign policy and our cooperation, which is good, because this is also key to success on the road to Belem. So this is my third key message. The road to Belem means taking multipolarity seriously and developing a suite of cooperation and partnership offers accordingly. So looking at the state of international climate politics, China and the US, well, of course, they are important. But they are no longer the only poles shaping the global landscape, the only major emitters shaping for climate safety. So a strategy that doesn't consider the economic and geopolitical clout of the BRICS, the moral authority of the small island states, the influence of major fossil nations seeking to maintain a market for their products, or the growing geopolitical competition for alliances with African nations is not fit for purpose. And at the same time, just as in the UK and Germany, climate impacts are hitting hard. And climate action is becoming ever more economic in our partner countries. So therefore, our climate diplomacy needs to be economic and development diplomacy. Germany has been laying the groundwork for this, including through our first ever climate foreign policy strategy. We're mainstreaming climate into our security, development, economic, trade, health, and foreign policy. And we've established over 50 climate priority embassies, including here in London. And we're working to develop more tailored cooperation and support models, be it the Global Shield against climate risk to support the most vulnerable countries and communities, our work to support African countries that are driving forward to 100% renewables via the African Partnership for Accelerated Renewables, or our green hydrogen diplomacy in Namibia or Chile that works at the intersection of trade and development, prioritizing local value creation while securing supply lines for our future energy system. It's very much still a learning process, but just as with our national climate efforts, our climate foreign policy is proving most effective when we work with partner countries to find win-win economic cooperation and make social considerations and local value creation a priority, not an afterthought. And at the same time, well, it's undeniable that to drive to a zero-carbon economy is bringing its own geopolitical implications and its challenges. So it's shifting the global balance of power. It's changing the parameters that define political and economic influence, parameters that throughout the 20th century have been defined by the ability to access and exploit fossil fuels. There will be those that benefit and those who are challenged by this transformation. So finally, stepping back, and this is my final message, the road to Belem is about changing what gets invested in and what doesn't. And I know this will be a topic coming up in your talks, and Selwyn also will be covering this, but I have three final thoughts on the priorities to Belem. Number one, across the board, we need to get finance flowing into the solutions. We cannot afford investments in fossil fuel-based infrastructure any longer. This means changing underlying risk models and incentive structures, be it those used by governments or finance institutions. Number two, alongside growing the green finance pie, we need to ensure more of it flows into emerging and developing countries. This means countries getting serious about these NDCs that can be jumping off points for investment, as well as drastically increasing the use of instruments that can overcome barriers to investment, be the cost of capital or currency risk. This is why Germany, together with the US and others, is continuing to push forward World Bank and MDB reform, and why we've initiated a Green Guarantee Group. And number three, we need to recognize that, at least in the short term, commercial green finance has its limits. There needs to be more concessional finance available, particularly for adaptation and overcoming loss and damage, and make it more accessible, especially for SIDS and LDCs. The climate crisis is fundamentally changing our politics, nationally and internationally, and in reaction, we are having to change the way we do politics. The road to Belem means taking this challenge seriously and being brave and bold enough to seize the opportunities that it offers. Let's be brave. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer, for those powerful words. I'm very happy we are doing Q&A, yeah. Happy to say that Jennifer's staying for the Q&A, so please welcome back Nick maybe. Thank you very much.
Yeah. We'll get better at this as we go on. Thanks so much for that, and thank you for the kind words about E3G. You talked eloquently about what Germany was doing, obviously, in a multipolar world. One of those poles which doesn't get talked about enough in this town, in our view, is Europe. And obviously, we've got a new parliament, we will have a new commission. What do you see Europe's role is in making this multipolar world work, and whether under Trump 2 or Biden 2, getting what we need from Belem?
I think Europe's world is, well, there's multi things, but I'll take two. I think one is that Europe can be self-confident vis-a-vis other partners around the world in the fact that at the heart of our economic, energy security, climate policy, we have a set of laws and regulations that are driving us forward in that zero carbon economy. And bring the benefits of that to other countries as not a coming and telling you what you should do, but sharing what the experience has been and what lessons we have, because we have to accelerate the pace of learning and everything. And the second, I would say, is the role of Europe, and maybe Germany, this is maybe a bias, but is to make sure that the most vulnerable are not forgotten in all of this. I think social justice, climate justice, it's at the heart of our climate foreign policy. And I think Europe often is the one that makes those, knows how important it is for us to work with SIDS and LDCs. And that, I think, is also a contribution that we can be bringing. And we need to stay that course and make sure that continues with them and with others as well.
Yeah. You're right. People don't realize that 80% of climate finance comes from Europe, I think, including the UK in that number. And most of that, a lot of that goes to developing countries. But obviously the big emitters, the biggest emitter is China. You've just done a trip around Asia. What were your reflections from China, and how is China thinking about next year and thinking about its role as the biggest emitter in the world, soon to overtake Europe in historical emissions as well? Yep. It is the big player on the block.
So my thoughts are that China is obviously at a critical kind of crossroads, that my optimistic hat, which one always has to have if one works for a long time on climate change, you know, they're in the midst, what they have achieved on renewables is extraordinary. And I think they're on their own journey nationally and seeing how they can be bringing energy security. Germany sees renewables as our energy security policy or security, together with climate, so that they can build, and this is key, it's a little geeky, but you'll appreciate the grids and the flexibility and the storage so that they can stop building so much, building new coal, and actually depend on a flexible grid that then can build their confidence to move forward. And I think seeing how the rate of increase of renewables in 2023, you know, if you were to say, okay, that can continue, it can really build the ambition. And, you know, this green transition that China's going through, there's some numbers out there, it's 40% of their GDP growth. So this isn't going to go away. This is core economic policy for China. And so I think the other key piece is, and maybe this is a European reflection right now, but they're not going to move away from that as a priority. So I think it's fundamental to engage in a very transparent manner to get fair trade rules in place. And my sense is that there's an openness for that conversation with Europe, at least, I can say.
Yeah. And that leads on, you've used a lot of words. I think we're going to hear a lot of confidence is one. You just talked about international rules, the international system around finance, the international system around trade, the international system that also helps on humanitarian and allows countries damaged by climate change to have some. That's not a very popular, the international rules-based system is not very popular. You go to a foreign policy conference, it's old hat. We're in this world of geopolitics. How do you see that relationship? What might success on climate mean for that broader discussion about rules? We need all of those rules, but is climate one of the things that can go bind up this fractured world a bit? Because, again, we all have a stake in it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what we see with our climate foreign policy, that climate stability is a goal, but it is also a lever for collaboration with other countries. Our embassies around the world are bombarded with interest to work together on this because it is such a priority to those countries. It's also an area where we can work together. One thing last week to say, yes, we talked trade, but we mostly talk climate in all of my conversations, right? And that's because I think there is an understanding of what is at stake, and we saw in Dubai, even with the geopolitics, we were able to come together and agree to transition away from fossil fuels. So holding that space together, building the trust, I want to put the trust word in the room, with developing countries, particularly as Europe, and as a foreign policy topic, seeing this isn't, yes, it's the climate, but see climate as what it can bring to a modern foreign policy as a whole. And if you're not doing that, then I think you're not seeing the realities of some of the shifting geopolitics that I explained.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I know your schedule is the maddest, I think, of all the climate envoys in the world. Thank you for spending time with us, for being so frank in your discussion. Please give a round of applause to Jennifer Morgan.
Thank you.